In this tutorial, I'm going to give you 5 ways to get started with Vue 3. Welcome back, everyone. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dan Vega, and I've been a software developer for over 20 years, a curriculum developer at a coding bootcamp called Tech Elevator, and I love to learn and take what I've learned and teach that to you. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, you can head over to danvega.dev. And with that, let's get into today's tutorial. So I have a little bit of a confession to make. I am not huge on options. In fact, when I go out to eat, I get the same thing almost every time. Yes, it's a little bit boring, but I know I'm going to like it. The problem with that is if you never try anything else, you're never going to learn about new things. So often my wife will give me something, let me try something of hers, and I go, wow, I should probably get that next time. So normally I like to give people one option to get started with something. So today is a little bit different. We're going to start with 5 options. And the reason I'm going to do that is because there are pros and cons to each of them. And there are different scenarios when you would want to use each one. So what we're going to do today is jump in and take a look at these 5 options and create 5 simple apps. These are pretty trivial apps, but they will get the job done. They'll teach you about the different methods to getting started with Vue 3. So with that, let's head over to the browser and take a look at the Vue 3 documentation. All right, so here we are on the Vue website. You can visit Vue.js.org, and the first thing you need to know is at the time of the recording, Vue 3 is out. It's in production. It's production ready. The only thing that's kind of still in development are the dev tools. So if you can do without the dev tools, you are ready to go. Now, with that said, because some of the third-party libraries and dev tools are still catching up, it's actually not the main documentation on their website. If you kind of click through and go to learn and go to the guides, these are all Vue 2 documents. So maybe you're watching this in the future and that doesn't matter, but if you're watching this now and you see this little green bar here at the top, you'll see that it says you are browsing the documentation for Vue 2.x, and earlier, click here for Vue 3 documentation. So that's very important to get started. It'll actually take you over to v3.vuejs.org. And so what you want to do is head over to docs and go over into guide. And a lot of what we're talking about is going to be here. There are some things here. We're obviously going to go into each of them a little bit further. But this is the main place to get started with Vue. I also want to point out that if you go to the docs, there is a migration guide. Now, we aren't going to be migrating any Vue 2 applications into Vue 3 today. We're going to be simply starting from scratch. So that is something to remember. But if you are looking to migrate your Vue 2 applications to Vue 3, this migration guide is a really great place to start. So the other thing I want to talk about is GitHub. If you go ahead and click on GitHub, this is actually going to take us over to the docs. But if you go to Vue.js and you look in here, we should be seeing something Vue Next. So Vue Next is actually the repo for Vue 3. So if you're ever curious and want to look around at not only the source code, but what are all the issues going on, pull requests, maybe even contribute something yourself, this is where you will want to look. All right, last but not least, I just want to point out that there is a GitHub repository for all the code that we're going to go through today, along with some READMEs that really walk you through the different examples that we're going to look at. So if you want to find it, you can go to this link here. I will also go ahead and put a link to this repo in the description below. So with that, let's get started with number 1, and that is CodePen. If you're not familiar with CodePen, it is this great online code editor that allows you to build, share, and learn JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But did you know that you can write Vue single-file components in CodePen? It isn't something that you can get to right here from the editor, but if you go to a special URL, you can open up a Vue editor, and they have support for Vue 3. So like I said, here I am here in my CodePen account, but if I start clicking around, I can't really find this. The only way that I've found to get to this is to go directly to the URL. So you go to codepen.io/pen/editor/Vue. And so from here, we can go ahead and write some Vue in a single file component. Now I'm going to get rid of all of this, and there's one important step to take, and that is you go up here and click on this. It is showing the Vue version, which is the latest of 2. We can go ahead and change that to Vue 3. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close this. So now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a simple Vue 3 application here in CodePen. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room to type. And the one thing that I really do love about CodePen is you get built-in Emmet support. So I can come in here and say template, and it makes it very easy to go ahead and type out code. I feel like I'm back home in an editor. So I could say hello Vue 3. I can go ahead and put in a p tag, and we're going to do something. We're going to output a variable that we haven't defined yet. So then I'm going to go ahead and type in a script block, and I'm also going to go ahead and put in a style block. And just to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy some styles in that just kind of cleans this up, gives us a nice little green background, and uses Flexbox to go ahead and align the content in the center of the page here. And so what I want to do now is go into the script tag, and I'm going to export default. This is kind of what you get bare bones when you create a single file component, say in Visual Studio Code, when you're using something like the Vue CLI, which we'll get to. So the first thing we want to do is define some reactive data. And the way that we do that is using the data function. Now, we're going to look at the composition API later, but I think one thing I want to stress to people is when you're moving to Vue 3, you don't automatically have to buy into all of the new features. One of the new features is the composition API, but it's not for everything. And for this simple component, I really don't need it. And so what I want to do is just set up some reactive data here. I'm going to return an object. All right, so I'm going to create a new variable called now, and it's going to be a new date. And we're just going to format that to a string. And now we see the string Thursday, October 29th, and we see the time outputted there. So now what I want to do is actually go ahead and update this every second. So one way that I can do that is come in here, and I'm going to create a mounted hook. And so in the mounted hook, I'm going to use setInterval. It's a JavaScript function that will allow us to repeat something on some type of interval. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is going to be a function. And in here, I'm going to call a method, and we're going to call a method. We'll say this.update date time. And we want to do this on the interval of every second. So now I'm going to come in here and go ahead and create that method. And that method is going to be update date time. And all we're going to do is set this.now equal to new date and toString. So now this should go ahead and fire off every second and call that update method to update our time, which it's doing. So pretty simple application here. We're just displaying the current time. It's kind of a ticker style. You could do some fancy things here, like format the date and string or date and time better and make it bigger. But you get somewhat of a little reactive clock going on here. So that is our first look at creating a new Vue 3 single file component. And we can do it right here in CodePen with no tooling, which is a really great way to get started, in my opinion, because it lets you kind of play around with the framework, the language, whatever it is. And it's a nice way to get familiar with something without, again, having to buy into like a whole tool chain just to create a simple demo application. So again, that's number one, CodePen, and let's go ahead and move on to number two. The second option we're going to look at is by using the CDN. So the CDN is just a script tag that you can drop on a normal HTML page and begin using Vue. So I'm going to head back over to the browser and go to the docs and the guide. And down here, you'll see a installation. And you'll see the CDN package. So the CDN, this is just this script tag. And you'll drop this just on an HTML page, and you can begin using Vue right away. So if we head back over here, I'm going to create a new file, and we'll call this index.html. We'll use Emmet to go ahead and scaffold out a quick page. We'll say hello Vue 3. And right here, we're going to go ahead and drop our script tag in. And so then we can begin working with Vue 3. So this is really a great option for those of you who want to incrementally include Vue into your application. So this could just be a standalone marketing page. This could be a form. This could be whatever you want. Again, the advantages here are you're not buying into the whole tool chain. Now, some of the disadvantages are you're kind of getting everything with Vue 3. One of the features of Vue 3, the size of the framework itself is greatly reduced because of code splitting, but you don't really get that when you use the CDN. You kind of get everything together. But again, there are pros and cons, and this is a really great option if you just want to drop Vue into a page and start using it. So what we're going to do is actually just create a new div here called app. In here, I'm going to create an H1, and again, we're just going to say hello Vue 3. Next, we'll create a paragraph, and we're going to use a variable called counter. And finally, I'm going to use a button that says start countdown. So now that we have our app, our template, we're going to go ahead and create our script section. So I'm going to go ahead and create a script block. And in here, I'm going to create a const called countdown app. And this is going to be an object. And again, this is using the options API. We don't need to bind everything in Vue 3 and use the composition API. We can use the options API here. So I'm going to say data. And again, data is a function that returns an object. And what I'm going to do is set a variable called counter, and I'm going to start it at 10. So once we're done there, we're going to have a methods block. And so in our methods block, we're going to have a method. So what we want to happen here is when the user goes ahead and clicks on this button, so when they click, we want to call a method called start countdown. And so down here, we'll have start countdown. All right, so what we're going to do here is use the set interval function again, and just like we did in the previous exercise. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and decrement the counter. So we're going to say this dot counter, go ahead and decrement it by 1. But what I need to do here is actually return something from set interval. So I'm going to say let timer equal to that. And the reason I need to do that is because if I don't do that, it will just go ahead and run forever. So I need to do that and say this dot counter is equal to 0. Let's go ahead and clear that interval out, and we're going to use that timer variable. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And last but not least, after all this, we're going to end up using the new global API in Vue. So that's one of the major things that has changed in Vue 3 is the global API. Again, go back to the documentation. It's right there in the documentation of one of kind of the breaking changes. But what we're going to do is we're going to say Vue, and we're going to create app. And so this is going to create an instance of our application, and we're going to use the countdown app. I spelled that wrong. Let's go ahead and fix that. So we're going to say countdown app. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mount that. So we're going to say mount, and we're going to mount that to our app div. So that should be all we need to go ahead and run this. So I'm going to go ahead and run this using Live Server. It's just an extension for Visual Studio Code or for Node, and it will just start up a small live server for you. So I'm going to go ahead and run with Live Server and not stop. So it'll go ahead and start the countdown, and looks like we messed something up. Set interval needs to know what the interval is. Let's try that and click start countdown. And there we go. So 987, it should go all the way down to 0 and then stop. It should clear that set interval and be done with it, which it did, which is good. So again, just a nice way to go ahead and drop Vue 3 into your existing applications using the CDN. A quick way to get started with it without having to buy into the whole entire tool chain. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to number 3. Now it's time to look at number 3 on our list, and that is the Vue CLI. So here we are in the documentation. If we head over to Docs and Guide, under Installation, you will see the CLI. So the CLI is basically an official CLI from the Vue team that provides quick scaffolding for single page applications. It basically allows you to pick your options, kind of like you're ordering from a menu, and whatever your application needs are, you can kind of pick from and kind of design your own starting point for your application. So there's a tip here that says the CLI assumes prior knowledge of Node.js and associated build tools. So if you're coming from something like React, you'll be familiar with this. If you're moving from something like jQuery, this may not be as familiar to you. So you should have a little bit of experience with Node, and you don't really need to understand how Webpack works underneath the hood, just kind of what build tools are in general. So for Vue 3, you should use the Vue CLI version 4.5. Now that's important. The versions don't align. When you're using the CLI, that is a tool that has its own version numbers, and Vue is the framework that has its own version numbers. So if you just want to add the latest, if you're watching this now or in the future, I guess anytime you're watching this is in the future. But if you're just going ahead and doing this fresh install, you can run yarn or npm, and you're basically installing globally the @vue/CLI. So if you want to learn more about the CLI too, you can go over to the CLI docs, or if you're up here in ecosystem, you can head over to Vue CLI, and that'll really teach you a lot more about the Vue CLI. For now, I'm going to switch over to a terminal, and I'm going to create a new project using the Vue CLI. So I have the Vue CLI already installed. If you're curious if you have it or not, you can always type Vue-v, and you can see that I'm running the Vue CLI 4.5.8. And you can kind of see in the background here, again, we should be running 4.5. So I am on a version that will support Vue 3. So if you type in Vue-h, you'll get all the commands that you can run from here. And then each of these commands have their own help context as well. So what we want to do is use that first command called create, which creates a new project powered by the Vue CLI service. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create, so let's look at this directory too. So I have a bunch of just Vue 3 projects in there. And so what we want to do is type Vue create hello Vue 3. And what this is going to do is create a new directory inside of the directory I'm in called hello Vue 3. Now, again, there's ways that you can configure that to put it in a differently named folder or the existing one, but this is the default behavior. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that and hit enter. Here is where we get into the picking your options phase of the Vue CLI. So you have standard project. Maybe you want something with all the tests. You have a default for Vue 2, which is just Babel and ESLint. You have a default for Vue 3, which is Babel and ESLint. And then you can manually select your features. And that's where you can pick all of your features like, hey, I need a router or I need state management. But for now, just today, we're going to go ahead and select default Vue 3 preview. And what that's going to do is go through and create us a sample application, which will get us up and running in Vue. So this is going to take about a minute. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this and join you in a second. Okay, so as you can see, it successfully created the project Hello Vue 3, and it also ran yarn install, which installs all the dependencies for me. So I don't actually have to do that when I go into that directory. So what I want to do is actually just open up this project in Visual Studio Code. So I can say code hello Vue 3 and hit enter. All right, so now the project's open here in Visual Studio Code. Again, as I said before, it ran npm install, so you can see we have our node modules. And then we have a couple of directories and files. So let's just kind of walk through this. So the first thing you want to look at is the package.json. This kind of defines any of our dependencies, our scripts, how we can run the application. So if you look in here, we have a few scripts, serve, build, and lint. So this means that if you want to go ahead and run the application, you can just say npm run serve, and that will run the Vue CLI service serve command. And that's really what we need to run the application. So I'm going to actually do that here in Visual Studio Code. And so I'm going to say npm run serve, and let's see what happens. All right, and the application's running on 8080. So if I head back to the browser, you can see that the application is up. So this is the default scaffolded application that you get with the Vue CLI. So if we head back to Visual Studio Code, I'll just kind of walk you through a couple things. So we have our public folder. This is where the root, the index.html file is. This is kind of what's served up from our application, and then all of our build files will be injected into this index.html. So where we care about, though, is in the source folder. We have a few things. So we have an app.vue and a main.js. And so if you've been following along here, the changes to Vue 3, one of the big changes was the global API. So you can see that we're importing this a little different now than we were in a Vue 2 application. So we import create app from Vue, and then we use create app to go ahead and pass in our main app component and mount that to a div called app. And that div is coming from our index.html, which you see right here. So that's the main.js, and then we have an app that is a single file component. All single file components usually have a template, a script, and a style. So here in our template, we have an image, and then we have another component, which is being imported from the components folder. So that declared import is here. We declare the component hello world, and then we're able to use it here in our template. So I think that's really all I want to show. Is just wanted to show a basic structure of an app and how you create one with the Vue CLI. So this is a really great option because, again, it's really flexible. It allows you to create some wide range of projects. And again, especially when you get into the manually selecting features, you can really pick and choose what your project is going to need. So I think we'll end that there. And if you like what the Vue CLI can do, but you're not much of a command line person, don't worry, I have something in store for you with number 4. All right, so number 4 on our list is the Vue CLI UI. So number 3, we took a look at the Vue CLI and how you can create an app using the command line. Now, there is a UI tool associated with the Vue CLI, which is really cool. So it allows us to use those same functionality, being able to select features, add plugins, but we can do it from a user interface instead of having to use the command line. And the way that you get to that is if you watch number 3, you still have to have the Vue CLI installed. But instead of using that Vue create command, what we can do is run Vue UI. So I just kind of want to show that again from the menu, though. If you go Vue-H, you can see that there is a UI option here as one of the commands. So this will start and open the Vue CLI UI. So we're going to go ahead and run Vue UI, and it's going to start up a GUI, run it on localhost 8080, and here we are in our dashboard. So now this gives you a really nice dashboard to manage all of your projects and go ahead and create new ones as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is head over to, this is the project that we're in right now. I want to go ahead and go to the Vue project manager, and you can see I have one project in here. And what I want to do is go ahead and create one. And so I'm going to actually have to pick a different directory, and we'll say create a new project here. And we're going to go ahead and put in a project folder name. So this is going to be Hello Vue 3. And as you can see, it's creating that directory underneath that parent directory that I've selected. So package manager, I use npm. You can just use that. That's the default. Additional options, overwrite target folder if it exists. I know it doesn't, so that's okay. Scaffold project without beginner instructions. This is actually a really nice feature if you don't need that hello world component that we saw before, and you just want, because most of the time if you use the Vue CLI or the Vue CLI UI, you create a project and you kind of rip that stuff out. So what I want to do is actually start without that, and then you can always just add in your own code there. And then do you want to initialize a Git repository? This is usually a good idea unless this is going to be part of another project that already has a Git repository, or if you're using some kind of other source control. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then what we want to do is select our preset. And this just looks exactly like the same list as we saw from the CLI. Because again, it's using the same infrastructure underneath. It's just giving you a UI look into that. So we're going to choose our default preset for Vue 3. I'm going to go ahead and click create project. All right, so now that the project has been created, we are here in the Hello Vue 3 project. And what you can do is you can come in and switch to recent projects, or if you have a bunch of projects in here, you can find the one that you need to work on. But it's going to take you into the one you just created. So now we can go into the different sections and we can see plugins. And here's where we can go ahead and add new features to our application. Like, hey, I need a routing system. Let's go ahead and add Vue Router. I need some state management. Go ahead and add Vuex. So these are two things that you add a lot. So that's why they're kind of easy to get to. You can go ahead and add plugins and search for other plugins from here as well. Then you can get a look at the dependencies. What are the main dependencies? What are the development dependencies? You can take a look at your configuration. So your Vue CLI is set up. Here's the config for that. And this is what I really love is the tasks. So remember when I showed you that if you wanted to go ahead and run the project, you really needed to look at the package.json and understand what scripts were available to you. From there, we knew we could run npm run serve to kind of start up the application. Well, here, these tasks are all in here for us. So if we click on serve, it's going to tell us that this compiles and hot reloads for development. And what we can do is go ahead and run this task right here from the UI without having to type out any commands, which I think is really nifty and handy. So it's built, it is ready to go. If we go ahead and click on Open App, it will open up that localhost 8080 there for us, and it will give us our application. So I'm not going to look at the actual code in Visual Studio Code because it's mostly the same. But that is a really nice way of using the Vue CLI using a graphical user interface, which is, again, very handy, especially for anyone who just doesn't like to be on the command line. The fifth way we can get started with Vue 3 is by using Vite. So Vite is a web development build tool that allows for really fast serving of code due to its native ES module import approach. So this is a fairly new project. It actually kind of started to align with Vue 3 as the different beta versions of Vue 3 came out. And again, this is a project from Evan You, the creator of Vue, and it was really meant to kind of speed up the development process. So you can learn more about Vite here. There's also a separate website for Vite that you can check out, or a GitHub repository with a bunch of explanations of what Vite is and why you might want to use it. So go ahead and check that out. But what we're going to do is just follow these instructions. So the way that you get started is by using Npm Init, and you can say Vite app and then the project name. So then we cd into the project name, and you can run npm install and npm run dev to get going. But let's go ahead and do this ourselves. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say npm init, and we're going to say Vite app and then the name of the app. And again, I've been deleting this directory after I'm done using it, so we can go ahead and use it over and over again. If you're following at home, you may want to create different names because just like the CLI, this is going to create a new folder in here in my main directory. So it's going to create a folder called Hello Vue 3. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter, and it's going to create this for me. So now it tells us I can run into cd into Hello Vue 3, and then npm install, and then npm run dev. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and actually just open this up in code. And with that, I want to take a look at the project structure. So one thing I really love about Vite is it takes a minimal approach. Now, you could still use this in production. Once you start getting into like, hey, I need a router and I need state management and I need these various plugins. Using the Vue CLI might be a better approach. I don't really know because honestly, all I've ever used Vite for now is just putting together some demos. But what I really love about it is for the teaching aspect of Vue, because it really simplifies the structure of a project. When you have a Vue CLI project, you got all these files. And if you're not familiar with, Babel configs or ESLint configs or Webpack configs, then it might be a little bit overkill and confusing. So here, all we have is a package.json. You'll see there's very few dependencies for this. See, there's two scripts in here, one for dev and one for build. You have an index.html. Again, this is going to be the main file for our application where our components are loaded into. And then you're going to have a public and a source. So everything kind of gets pushed into a public folder, I think, when you go ahead and build it out. I can't remember, to be honest. But there is a build command that you can end up using, and then you can use that to go ahead and push into production. But we're just going to be running dev today, and all of that source code is here in our source folder. So we have an app.vue, and this kind of looks pretty similar to the app that we've been building in using the Vue CLI or Vue UI. There's just a logo, a hello world component that we're importing from components, and we have a main.js. And in the main.js, again, we're using Vue 3. So we're using that new global API. We're importing create app from Vue. And what it's going to do is create the app, pass in the app component, and then mount it to a div with an ID of app. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like when we run it. And if you're following along, one of the differences is it doesn't run the npm install command for us afterwards. So we do need to go ahead and install any dependencies before we run this application. Once those dependencies are installed, we can go ahead and run npm run dev, and you'll see just how quickly it runs. Up and running right away, and it actually includes hot module replacement. So as we go ahead and change our components, it will just reload for us, and it reloads really quickly. So let's head over to the browser and check out localhost 3000, and there is our Vue app. All right, so with the default app up and running, I want to go ahead and make our own little app here. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of all the default templating here. I'm going to get rid of the hello world component, and we're just going to use we're going to write our own application here in our main app component. And you can see every time I'm changing it, it's going ahead and hot reloading. So what I'm going to do here is in the template, I'll go ahead and use an H1. We'll say hello Vue 3. I'll go ahead and add a paragraph tag. We're going to output a variable called count. And I'm also going to add a button, and the button is going to say start counting. And so eventually we're going to add a click handler to that, and it's going to start incrementing the counter for us. So what I'm going to do down here is in the default, I'm going to add, I actually don't need this. I'm going to go ahead and add a setup function, and this is where the composition API comes into play. So I have a whole other video on using the setup function and the composition API, which I will go ahead and link to in the description below. So I just wanted to show the composition API in a very simple application. So with that, let's do this. We're going to go ahead and create a const called count. And this is going to be a ref, and we're going to set the initial value to 0. And I'm going to go ahead and need to import that. So I'm going to say import ref from Vue, and usually that will automatically import. I'm not sure why it didn't do it there for me. So now I'm going to create a function, and this function is going to be start counting. And in this start counting, I'm going to create a set interval, and in this set interval function, we are basically going to increment the value of count, and we're going to do this every 100 milliseconds. So it's going to be very fast. So finally, from this setup function, I need to return anything I want to use in the template. So I'm going to say return count and return start counting. So now we can use count here, and in the button, I'm going to go ahead and add an on-click handler, and we're going to say start counting. So if I save that, you see it's hot reloaded. I should go back to the browser, and we have hello Vue, we have 0, and if I click start counting, it will just go on and count forever. So I'm going to go ahead and shut that program down so it just doesn't do this forever. And that really all there is to Vite. Again, Vite is just a really nice development experience. It's very fast. It allows me to quickly prototype out some applications. I'll be honest, I haven't used any Vite applications in production yet. And it's not really because I don't think it could handle it. I just really haven't had the opportunity to. So if you want, especially if you're like teaching, I found out that if I'm teaching Vue, I find Vite to be a lot easier because, again, there's not as many moving parts. There's not a lot of magic going on. There's not a ton of dependencies. It's really small, it's really fast, and it's kind of easy to teach with. So that was number 5, Vite. And there you have it, 5 different ways that you can get started with Vue 3 today. So just to recap, number 1 was CodePen. Number 2 was the CDN. Number 3, the Vue CLI. Number 4, the Vue CLI UI. And number 5, Vite. Again, as I stated at the beginning of this tutorial, I'm not really big on giving people so many options to get started with something because it can be confusing. But there are different reasons that people get started with Vue, and I think exploring some of these different options may help people get started instead of kind of detract them from getting started. If the only thing you show someone is the Vue CLI and they think that that's what Vue is, they may not be interested in it. But if you tell them that you can drop a CDN on a page somewhere and just throw it into your existing application, that may very well help them, and vice versa. So I really hope all of these options help you get started with Vue 3 today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and leave me a question below. If you found value in this, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Subscribe if you can. And as always, friends, happy coding.